Do you agree with those assessments that what Israel's offensive in Gaza was a genocide of the Palestinian people?
So, no, I do not agree with those assessments. And I am running my campaign in the way that I have run and won all of my races, which is
Welcome to The Moment. I'm your host, Brad LaPlante. Haley Stevens built her career on the factory floor, first championing Manufacturing USA and now steering industrial policy from Congress. As the Midwest navigates an era of automation, electrification, and global competition, Stevens argues that America's edge will come from talent, research, and a steady hand on trade. In my conversation with Stevens, we dig into what advanced manufacturing actually looks like after China's subsidies and Europe's green industrial push, and what moves the needle in Michigan's evolving pipeline. We'll also discuss the dynamics of the government shutdown, and inside the Democratic Party, we will explore tensions roiling a key Senate race, including whether Israel's war on Gaza meets the definition of genocide and the role of Arab American voters. Here is our conversation. Hey, Congresswoman, how are you?
and I'm doing okay, but I'm very worried about Michiganders. I mean, this has been a tough year. There's been a lot of chaos and confusion, and I'll just say that the stories that I hear from people in Michigan are really alarming. It's worries about jobs, it's costs. There's obviously a lot of pride in our state, and there are some exciting things going on. Although we had a tough sports weekend, we've got our grit and we've got our way forward. It's just it seems like a lot of things that were going pretty well in terms of employment and job security and access to benefits are really being challenged right now. And so that has me on overdrive. I'm sleeves rolled up. I've been rigorously hard at work this entire term, and I'm not stopping.
Yeah, I understand that. As far as that note about, I know it has been a tough sports weekend, but the Red Wings won, which is has me on. I'm up there because of that. So that's for me. That's all I care.
That is true. That is true. You know,
I want
we
to.
can reclaim our roots.
I want to
On
start
hockey.
kind of at the maybe at towards the beginning of your career. You you've done quite a bit, and I want to ask, just like kind of to start, what do you see as like the pivotal moment that set you on the path from going from manufacturing advocacy, working with on Hillary Clinton, and then I believe it was Obama's campaigns for president, and then now serving in Congress, and how do you think that origin has shaped your agenda?
Well, it actually, in many respects, starts with a job I had when I was in grad school in West Michigan, working with the Michigan Democratic Party on the midterm elections. And I was working side by side with a UAW CAP coordinator, UAW retirees. This is when the Wyoming plant was still open, the General Motors plant. And growing up in Michigan and growing up around all the hard work, particularly of my parents. My parents actually owned a small business. It was a landscaping business, and my dad used to pick me up from school, the after school care covered in dirt because he'd just been, out, planting trees and out with his crew. And of course, in the winter, it was snow plowing. And so it was no matter the hour, my dad would wake up to the sound of the snow falling to go and plow lots and get other hardworking Michiganders to their jobs. And so for me, it's never been about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being the hardest working. And I've always just felt called to, put up my hand and to help and to make a difference. And that's like the beauty of our country in many respects. But my tie into advanced manufacturing and manufacturing work really began with my Michigan story. My dad's father was also UAW, worked at what A lot of long timers call it Fords, in downtown Detroit. And my dad claims that his father was the hardest working person he knew. And, that's just some of the Michigan tradition that I was raised around. And so that value of hard work really led me to putting up my hand for this state in, the Obama administration to work on the US Auto Rescue as the chief of staff. And that was obviously a very trying time in our state. And it was really just the lifeblood of Michigan that was pumping through my veins of what can I do in this exciting new administration, but in this tough moment in the middle of a great recession for the people and the economy that is moves us forward in our state. And so that's how that kicked a lot of that off for me. And it was certainly very sobering being the person taking the calls for Michiganders. That's what I told the Treasury and the White House operators. I was like, hey, wire those calls to me and let me take those calls from back home. And there was a lot of worry and a lot of concern. And frankly, Brad, there's a lot of similarities from those conversations in the Great Recession to the conversations I'm having with constituents now in my fourth term in Congress.
A lot of people are concerned too with, I mean, we're talking the age of AI, the, automation, electric vehicles. There's a lot of new shifting technology going on right now. I want to know what, in your view, do you see as the next maybe evolution in manufacturing policy to stay competitive with China and Europe?
Yeah, well, this is one of the reasons why I've been working so hard and aggressively as a lawmaker to secure our supply chains, lower costs, and bring jobs back to Michigan. I've written legislation called Unearth America's Future Act, which does just that in the space of critical minerals and rare earth elements. 95% upwards are refined and processed in China. We've basically given them a whole industry. I call this legislation CHIPS 2.0 because a lot of it is based off of the success of the CHIPS Act, which was very successful public-private partnership, obviously took federal dollars, but within 1/4 of that legislation being signed a handful of years ago, the private sector quadrupled their capital investment in the United States of America. That's how I view industrial policy. I know that's how our large automakers view industrial policy. And look, I'm not in the business of selling manufactured goods, although I deeply respect those who make those goods and seek to sell them. And I want us as Michiganders, our state, to be leading in that space. We are one of a handful of states that is uniquely tied to the industrial sector as the chief driver of our state's gross domestic product. It is a large employer. I go into agricultural communities, particularly as a candidate for US Senate in this moment, and I can speak their language because of my industrial background, because of how intertwined making and growing things is, the equipment that is on these farms and the like. And of course, absolutely managing and balancing the future. I've been a part of certainly the conversations that have speculated about where the future is going. I think, any of us who were coming of age in this new millennium, we've been surrounded by the claims of futurism, but we've also just got to look at hard-nosed reality in the face. We need skilled trades. We are cut above in Michigan, and we have an amazing competitive advantage because of our manufacturing talent, our engineering talent, the educational centers we have, the training centers we have. We have a national day called Manufacturing Day that exposes students to these skilled jobs in the manufacturing sector. And we this year I went with my friends in Oakland County at Oakland Technical College and schools, and it's remarkable what Oakland County has been able to put forward for educational training in the skilled trades. Welders in grade 11, welders before they're in out of high school. That's a skill that no one can ever take from you, and that you can have as you go forward in your career. And so we want to continue to double down on that. I'm also on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. I've been passing AI, writing and passing AI legislation since I first got into Congress. I see this as very critical to our winning the future and continuing to lead the free world that follows, and the industrial rules of open capitalism and open free market capitalism, and not what we get from autocracies. But we just cannot forget the skilled trades in the process. We're gonna have both, and we also cannot be leading by fear. We've got to be leading through our success and what we do really well. And this is again another reason why I'm running for United States Senate, to represent Michigan as the chief lawmaker in the upper chamber in our Congress, because we've got a story to tell, and I want to be the one to do that.
And I want to talk. You mentioned AI, and I think this is. I mean, it's truly fascinating. With OpenAI just came out with. I'm sure you've seen the video app Sora, where it's like TikTok, but like you can make AI videos like of your friends, of yourself. Like it's very I saw a YouTube creator make a video of him like as a Formula One driver in the 80s, like winning and it was him. It looked like so realistic. And then obviously that is one side of it being used sort of benign, right? And then you have this other side of it, right, where and I'm not really going to dig into kind of I'm sure you've seen the Katie Porter video of the CBS interview, right, where she was getting, defensive, argumentative with a reporter. Well, that was obviously a big story in and of itself, but then there was an AI video that I saw following that story, and it was her fighting like the reporter, which did not happen, in real life, right? And so there are people who are saying this technology is advancing so quickly. And I mean, there are a lot of people who think that we need AI legislation, comprehensive AI legislation yesterday. And a lot of people also don't think that that will happen or anytime soon, because internet legislation has been so weak to happen since with data mining and collecting, and Google knows this and that about you. What is your take on that? And do you kind of see it as urgent as some people do?
Well, I know that my legislation to combat deep fakes and to be able to detect deep fakes, which is an example that you referenced, and this was legislation that I put forward in my first term in Congress in the year 2019, and it passed into law that term. Uh, that's an area in which we've acted, but my privacy enhancing technologies research bill that's passed the House twice, in an overly bipartisan way. It won't pass the Senate because someone like Ted Cruz wants to block it at the last minute. And it's just stalling the progress to develop the technologies and enhance the technologies to strengthen the guardrails in terms of regulation, which you're speaking to. Look, we're in a moment that is calling and challenging the very direction of our democracy. Whether it's images or mass information meeting misinformation, the way in which words get litigated and spoken in different media channels, the rules of the road are so very different. And this is something that I think is going to take all of us coming together to really I put up the best guardrails and to make sure that it's our rules of the road coming from the United States of America and not an adversary. And it's not as simple as just rejecting the technology. Because it's there, and when you see an image, even though it's fake, you still can't unsee that you saw that, and it can't just be regulated because it's blasphemous or inappropriate. It's really I think got to come down with some stricter rules. And I'm going to be very interested and remain interested in having those policy conversations. as I still serve on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and as somebody who is working to be Michigan's next United States Senator. I think these are conversations worthy of our government leaders as well as those from industry and the public.
And I want to turn to the government shutdown right now. I don't have too much time, but I did want to ask one question on it. Specifically, we see a lot of blame game going on, right? Republicans blaming Democrats for the shutdown, Democrats blaming Republicans, and then you have rogue Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is going out and blaming GOP leaders, and she's obviously concerned about her own party's optics in the midterms. Um, where do you see the shutdown for from your point of view? I just spoke with Tom Barrett, who's a representative from our viewing area. Um, and he's also been blaming Democrats. Where do you guys see it from your perspective? And how long do you think it'll last?
Well, let's just be very clear that it's Republicans who are proposing cuts that would strip healthcare from hundreds of thousands of Michiganders, and they're putting the tax breaks on billionaires and corporations ahead of families in Michigan, and it's not acceptable to see this cost of living crisis balloon out of control. And it's going to get even worse if we don't address these rising costs on healthcare. And the Congress can do what it has always done when passing budgets, which is negotiate and compromise. This isn't a carte blanche mandate. It is going to require bipartisan cooperation. And the request to just stand up for Michigan families and the pocketbooks of families has been made very clear.
Now, going to that Senate race, obviously, it will be one of Democrats against likely Mike Rogers, right? And if you follow the Michigan Senate race, it's interesting because it's one of a few throughout the country that pits a maybe institutional Democrat such as yourself and a more progressive candidate, in this case, Abdul El-Sayed, Mallory McMorrow. I want to kind of talk about this. Some people have called it an identity crisis for the Democrats, coming off of the 2024, loss in the election to Donald Trump. Where do these ideological divides between progressives and institutional Democrats, like where do you see those in your eyes?
Yeah, well, I certainly, will leave the punditry to the pundits, but what I can tell you about what I'm doing is I am running for United States Senate because I love Michigan and I want to be Michigan's chief champion and chief lawmaker. And as someone who flipped a long held Republican congressional seat to become the first Democrat since before the moon landing to be the first woman to hold the seat, the first millennial. That someone actually just sent me that headline the other day, like Michigan sends its first millennial to Congress. I think that was like kind of in vogue for a term or two, and then Gen Z came along. But it's look. I have always met people where they're at. I brought bold ideas and real results to Michigan, and I am very much in that lane for our state, for Michiganders of all stripes who want to see tough, good leadership that works for them.
We are seeing a major focal point with this Senate race is going to be the Israel-Hamas conflict in the Middle East, and obviously we're seeing a peace deal now, which a lot of people have said is a great thing. But I talked with a Palestinian from MSU just a couple days ago who was upset about the pro-Israel nature of the deal and how it doesn't really do enough for Israel in terms of the attack on Palestine, the flattening of the area. Where do you see that in? Do you agree with that assessment that maybe this deal doesn't hold Israel accountable for what has happened in the Middle East?
Well, we're certainly in a tenuous moment. And I know for a long time, I have joined the many, many, many people who I think all agreed that the war needed to come to an end, that the hostages needed to come home. I certainly know that destabilizing Hamas and continuing to see them destabilize will lead to prolonged peace, and we want to see a permanent and lasting ceasefire in the region. And as a member of Congress, my heart has broken with the pain and suffering of this war and what it has also brought to people in our own country. I know that some of the images that we just can't look away from that have come out of Gaza are they're hard to take, and we do need to look at rebuilding efforts and getting aid in. That is something I have called for Israel and the United States to work for. So something I called for in the wake of this negotiated first part of the deal. And it's also something that I have consistently voted for as a member of Congress every chance I have gotten. And so, we are obviously recognizing that, the hope remains to have lasting and longstanding peace where people in Israel can live in peace and security, just as people in Gaza and Palestinians deserve to live in peace and security.
And then, obviously talking about Michigan, right? Michigan has the largest concentration of Arab Americans in Dearborn, many of which did not vote for Joe Biden or Kamala Harris in the last election cycle, and then Trump ended up winning the state. What do you say to those voters who, and some feel that, if you're running against Abdul El Sayed, who's been critical of Israel from the start, calling it a genocide, what's happening in Gaza. And then McMorrow just said, by definition, that it's a genocide. Do you agree with those assessments that what Israel's offensive in Gaza was a genocide of the Palestinian people?
So, no, I do not agree with those assessments. And I am running my campaign in the way that I have run and won all of my races, which is certainly meeting people where they're at and hearing what is on their mind, and uh, offering them my listening ear, my learning mind, and my leading heart. I really believe in listening, learning, and leading in that order. And I believe that my vision for Michigan and our economy and our workforce and our middle class that needs to continue to grow, access to housing, justice in terms of infrastructure efforts, as well as uh, our transportation sector. That is also really meeting the needs of folks, and in terms of what they want to see in their next senator. And I, am so proud of Michigan's incredible and rich diversity. And that is something that, is a bragging point for our state. It is one of the reasons why we are a global trade destination and why we have such incredible enterprises. So my campaign is going everywhere, and I certainly have inclusivity and a want to connect with everybody as I'm out there on the trail.
And then lastly, a lot of I've seen a lot of people talk a little bit about the Democratic Party and say that they don't think that people are necessarily standing up to Trump in a way that they would like. Can you talk a little bit about how if you were elected to the Senate, how you would stand up to Trump's maybe specific things that you would do to counter his approach to the presidency?
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why I feel very strongly about this moment and what I'm doing to put up my hand at this time. Certainly, as a member of Congress who has the ability to write and introduce federal legislation now, I am showing people exactly how I will stand up to this current administration and the chaos agenda. First and foremost, I have written legislation to stop the abuse of power and the deploying of the military on American citizens. I found a loophole in the Insurrection Act of 1807. This is legislation that I wrote earlier this year, obviously quite prescient, particularly given some of the statements and calls to action that the president and his cabinet secretary have used in front of military generals, and also just ways in which they are not coordinating with local law enforcement or state officials. And so that is a bill I have called Stop Trump's Abuse of Power. I've also written legislation out of the jump, given that my time in federal civil service with a political appointment. When I was chief of staff on the auto rescue, I was working at the Treasury Department, and we never ever conceived of having someone access the records of taxpayers, certainly without guardrails or ethical considerations. And so I wrote the Taxpayer Data Protection Act, particularly to stand up to Elon Musk. And the other thing that I want your listeners to know is that using my vote and my voice accordingly is so deeply important. And that vote always carries weight. It will certainly carry a lot of significant weight in the United States Senate. I cannot go forward with legislation or deals that are not good for Michigan, and I will always fight for Michigan, and that is something that I remain very dedicated to now and for the future.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Congresswoman. I appreciate it.
Yeah, good to see you.
That's it for our show this week. Thanks to Haley Stevens for joining the show. This episode was produced by WLNS Digital. Our digital team is led by Duncan Phoenix and assisted by Dalen Huff, Shajeka Shelton, and Trevor King. Our station's news director is Jam Sardar. This episode was edited, produced, and written by yours truly. WLNS is a Nexstar station and a CBS affiliate. I'm Brad LaPlante. Thank you for listening.